May God bless the loss of innocent life on this sad day. And may the Lord be near the brokenhearted and save those crushed in spirit.
The U.S. is in mourning. 21 people were killed in Texas after a gunman opened fire inside a school. Many people are expressing their support for the families of the victims. What investigators are revealing about the shooter as reaction comes in from around the world. BNC Live starts now. Thank you for joining us. I'm Naja Sherman. Flags are at half staff in our nation's capital after another shooting has rocked our country. The outrage and devastation continues as families mourn the loss of 21 people killed. It happened during a school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. That's about an hour and a half outside of San Antonio. This morning, parents are still praying for a miracle, waiting to find out about their child's whereabouts as we all ask why. Mike Valero has the latest on the investigation.
I see this in the news somewhere else, but not here, but it is happening here.
Just 2 days before the end of the school year, a teenage gunman turned a Texas elementary school into a scene of carnage.
To lose a child is like having a piece of your soul ripped away.
Parents in the small community of Uvalde waited in anguish late into the night for news of their children, some telling CNN they had to give DNA samples to help authorities identify them.
We don't know a list of who's gotten flown out. Tell us where my daughter's at.
Among those killed, according to her aunt, Eva Morales, a fourth grade teacher and educator for 17 years, and 10-year-old Amarillo Garza, whose father confirmed her death early this morning on Facebook.
Furious because there's now 18 or more families in Texas that are about to enter a new nightmare.
Authorities say the 18-year-old suspected gunman shot his grandmother before driving to rob elementary school and slaughtering innocent children and their teachers.
Unfortunately, he was able to enter the premises, and then from there, that's when he went on and entered several classrooms and started shooting.
While authorities search for a motive, this town and this country are grieving another senseless mass shooting.
Vice President Kamala Harris is among federal leaders expressing dismay for the deadly school shooting. Here's what she had to say during the 20th Annual Awards Gala for the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. Take a listen.
Every time a tragedy like this happens, our hearts break. And our broken hearts are nothing compared to the broken hearts of those families. And yet it keeps happening. So I think we all know and have said many times with each other, enough is enough. Enough is enough. As a nation, we have to have the courage to take action and understand the nexus between what makes for reasonable and sensible public policy to ensure something like this never happens again.
There are so many conversations surrounding gun violence and what needs to change to prevent another school shooting from happening. Joining me now for this discussion is Maj Toure with Black Guns Matter and Gabriela Diaz with Moms Demand Action. Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us today. Gabriela, before we get into what your organization does, you have been an educator for 15 years. How upsetting is it to hear that these shootings continue to happen at a place that should be safe for our children?
Vice President Harris is absolutely right to ask students and teachers. This is year 16 for me. I just dropped off my third grader at school, my seventh graders here at home. But to ask students and teachers like us to have courage to militarize our schools because our legislators ask courage is unacceptable, and it's time for change.
Maj, you were just in Buffalo last week for that mass shooting. What is your response knowing that another mass shooting has taken place?
First and foremost, I want to give condolences to everyone on the panel, because even though we may not have had friends and family there, we are all impacted by this. So that's first step, as well as obviously the loved ones of the people slain and murdered. And I hope this guy gets everything that he deserves. The reality is this is a wake-up call yet again for us to, I do agree with Vice President Kamala Harris in saying we do have to have the courage to do something. Clearly, creating more legislation isn't stopping, it's actually emboldening, like the killer in Buffalo, saying, I'm picking this place in Buffalo because there's going to be no one there to defend the innocent lives. And so I do think we have to have the courage to come up with a different way of not making our schools soft targets, and at the same time, not making this places where we send our children look like militarization zones. We just spent $40 billion over to Ukraine. I would love to have seen 20, 30, 40, or $50 billion going into comprehensive solutions on how we can protect our most valuable resource, which is our children.
Gabriella, there has been a real lack of reform. Do you see that as the issue in response to what Maj just said?
Absolutely. We haven't not only not done anything since Sandy Hook or Santa Fe, we've regressed in Texas. We've dismantled responsible gun laws like criminal background checks and very basic training to carry publicly. My husband's a veteran. I support the Second Amendment, but I've never met a gun owner who disagrees that everybody should go through a criminal background check. Only 15 out of 50 states require that if your gun is stolen, you report it to a police officer. And in Houston alone, there's 265 guns stolen out of cars every single month. So we absolutely need more legislation. The rest of the world has shown us that they can live day to day without these tragedies. And America needs to step up and take more action.
Maj, we've learned that the gunman was able to purchase the guns legally. So what would you like to see maybe done differently when it comes to access to weapons?
So I have to say a few things here. One, there's always a background check anytime anyone purchases a firearm legally. That's in all 50 some odd states and territories. If you purchase a firearm, you are filling out a background, which is a 4473, which is a federal form, anytime that you purchase a firearm in store. So I want to be clear on that misnomer. And if this person was able to lawfully purchase a firearm, this is something that we're talking about in regards to making more of a rule or restricting people from exercising their Second Amendment rights, as opposed to on the ground, what do we have in position to train students, faculty, and staff, and hire some veterans to protect our children? I think that's more important as opposed to having this argument about should we put more restrictions on the Second Amendment or citizens that are doing the right thing, as opposed to protecting life from the students in that moment. Those students needed someone there trained and responsible to help protect life, more than just one person. So I think there's two different conversations here. And I think the conversation about protecting our babies takes precedent over our political aspirations or narrative. To me, as a person that has a child, my daughter's in the other room, I want to, anywhere that I may not be, if I happen to send her to a public school, I want someone there to protect our children while balancing and making it not look like an over-militarized zone. And it can be done where Americans, we can do this properly.
Gabby, I see you shaking your head. What do you want to say in response?
I just have to clarify that here in the state of Texas, I can pass a background check. I can go to my local gun shop and I can buy a gun, and then I can walk right out into the parking lot and sell it to whoever I want. And politicians like Dan Crenshaw will say things like, it's illegal to sell a weapon to a felon. But as a private citizen, I do not have the methods to check somebody's criminal history. I work very closely with Kingwood Guns, who's the gun shop closest to me, and they agree that in states where you do those private transactions at a gun shop and you make sure that if you're selling to your neighbor, to your uncle, to whoever, that there is a criminal background check that's done, in those states, surprise, surprise, there are lower instances of gun violence. I am tired of asking students and teachers to practice being in a war zone. None of us on this call had to hide under a desk. And it's not just schools. Are we going to militarize our grocery stores, our synagogues, our yoga studios, our hair salons? There are basic common sense laws that 90% of Americans who can't even agree on like what's better, Coke or Dr. Pepper, a great majority of Americans agree on these very basic laws that don't infringe on anybody's rights except for criminals. So to be clear, private sales in Texas do not include background checks. That includes some sales at gun shows. That includes person-to-person sales. It's a problem and it needs to be addressed. No other country on this planet has this problem.
Those things don't solve the problem, though. We're talking about saving life. You're talking about your political view of firearms ownership in that scenario. You're talking about, you haven't even shown that this young man, so supposed young man, purchased a firearm in a private sale. You're ascribing something to something that you don't know, and it still doesn't solve whether that person can't get that firearm lawfully or lawfully. I'm talking about protecting children in that moment when a psychopath does something. The things that are being presented by a lot of people, and let me be very clear, we are both passionate about protecting our babies. Let me be very clear about this. This is not an antagonistic statement, but just doing something as opposed to doing something that works is clear. When you talk about the states that have more restrictions, Buffalo, New York, has some of the most restrictive gun control measures in America. And this weirdo was still able to go in there and murder our elders. So we can't just talk about what we think should be done. We have to look at the data and see what actually works. Even when we say 90% of all Americans agree, that's a falsehood. You did not poll 90% of all Americans. And from a place of empathy and respect for private citizens and individuals' rights, while doing something that actually works on the ground to protect our children, if we're talking about data and statistics, the vast majority of these mass shooters, when they are stopped or met with someone with a firearm, vast majority of the time they either kill themselves, which I'm perfectly fine with, or they're taken into custody, which I'm also fine with. So what I'm saying here is all of these extra laws and rules and regulations, right? They are not going to stop an insane person. I want someone there to protect our children. The same politicians that are talking this stuff have armed security details. The same politicians that support the police and support, the thin blue line, they are saying that law enforcement they want them to have firearms as well. There is a way to balance this on the ground. That child doesn't care who's coming to protect them. They have the right to be safe. And unfortunately, these weirdos are picking places since 1990 when gun-free zones are in existence. Over 90%, if we're talking about data, over 90% of the mass shootings are in gun-free zones. In Buffalo, this young man specifically said this is why he was going there. On the ground, we need people, trained veterans, law enforcement, volunteers that train and are willing to protect our children. We can have the conversation about who should get what firearm, but the reality is these bad guys are going to get them, and we need to protect our children physically in that moment. Anything else does not protect a life.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Appreciate you both so much for joining us. I think this was a great discussion. Gabby Diaz with Moms Demand Action and Maj Toure with Black Guns Matter. Thank you both for sharing your perspectives. There is still so much more BNC Live straight ahead, including the ways that we can help our children make sense of these tragic moments. Keep it right here. This is BNC.
The idea that an 18-year-old kid can walk into a gun store and buy 2 assault weapons is just wrong. What in God's name do you need an assault weapon for except to kill someone? Deer aren't running through the forest with Kevlar vests on, for God's sake.
Welcome back to BNC Live. You just heard from President Biden. People around the country are still trying to understand how another mass shooting on school grounds has taken place. Many now wondering what this means for our educators. Joining me right now is Texas Board of Education member Stacey Childs. Thank you so much for being with us today. Stacey, teachers are dealing with so much, especially in Texas. Just last week, it was the anniversary of the Santa Fe High School mass shooting. What is the tone today among you and your colleagues?
It's very saddening. Last night, I was on the brink of winning the State Board of Education race here in Houston, Texas, and in District 4, but it was a very sad time. 19 small children were massacred and murdered, as well as their teachers. So as I think about what my platform will be and what I can do to make sure that schools are better in Texas, I'm thinking, how can we make sure our teachers are safe to go to work and how students can feel safe to go to school, which is something they have to do every day.
And speaking to that, if it's not COVID-19, it's a mass shooting. Teachers in this environment are fearing for their lives. What is being done to keep them safe?
That's a good question. Firstly, when we think about this shooter and this killer that did this awful thing, where was the mental health resources that he needed to prevent this? And moreover, where were the mental health resources for the teachers and the students so that they can get through this? There are teachers and students that are going to have to survive this and deal with the trauma and the aftermath of what they saw last night and yesterday for the rest of their lives. And what are we doing about that? So there needs to be a real conversation around safety in schools, but also how can we fix this mental health crisis that we're in?
You're exactly right. This will change their lives forever. A lot of people arguing right now the state is trying to regulate what can be taught in the classroom instead of working to solve problems like gun issues. What are your thoughts on that?
Real life is happening to teachers and students every day. And while we do have to keep our students safe, shielding them from having open, honest conversations about what's going on in their world is not going to help. So as the next state board member, my job will be to encourage legislators to make sure that we can have open, honest discourse in the classroom, and we can make sure that students know the truth about what's going on, of course, at their levels, because that is what is going to be needed to protect them in society.
During the pandemic, so many educators left the profession, and reports just out show that we're going to continue to see that drop in teachers for this next school year. That's terrifying. How are you responding to that? And then also taking into consideration all that teachers are up against, because you can understand why they would want to leave the classroom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I am going to use my voice and to leverage my voice to make sure that teachers know you're still supported, you're still valued, you're still cared for, and I will do my part to make sure that I support teacher pay increases, because that's far overdue, and to make sure they feel safe while they're in schools. And whatever measures need to be taken to protect our teachers, I will make sure that I am an advocate for that, because we have been expecting teachers to be superheroes day in and day out, and they have come to school to teach our babies and to teach our children. Now it's time to stand in the gap and protect them and show them that we value them and that we care for them.
You're exactly right. We expect them to be superheroes, but we're not even paying them livable wages. It's disgusting. What would you like to see change?
I want to see teachers being paid more. I don't want to see teachers literally in fear of their lives when they're going to work, but then not able to go home and feed their children or go home and decide what bills they're going to pay. That's disgusting. So if we're going to put teachers on the front lines to protect our kids and to literally fight for their lives while they're in school, we should give them an honest living wage. And I want to see that changed. And I also want to see teachers supported. If they need more professional development, if they are crying out and saying that they need something from administrators and from school districts across Texas, I need to see that happen.
Stacey Childs, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight with us today. Don't go anywhere. Our coverage of the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas continues after a brief break. This is BNC. And welcome back to BNC Live. Let's take a look at social media as outrage continues to flow in following the deadly mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas. Actor Matthew McConaughey, who is from the area, wrote in part, "This is an epidemic we can control, and whichever side of the aisle we may stand on, we all know we can do better. We must do better. Action must be taken so that no parent has to experience what the parents in Uvalde and others before them have endured." Golden State Warriors coach Steve Kerr has been going viral after comments he made before Game 4 of their playoff series. Take a listen.
Since we left shoot-around, 14 children were killed 400 miles from here, and a teacher. And in the last 10 days, we've had elderly black people killed in a supermarket in Buffalo. We've had Asian churchgoers killed in Southern California, and now we have children murdered at school. When are we going to do something?
Such emotion, such powerful words. We continue our coverage on the shooting on the other side of the break. Stay with us. This is BNC. Thank you for staying with us here on BNC Live. I'm Naja Sherman. As we continue our coverage on the Uvalde school shooting, lawmakers are now pleading for gun reform. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy got very emotional as he asked his colleagues to work on a path forward. It was just a few hours of after the mass shooting. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I'm here on this floor to beg, to literally get down on my hands and knees and beg my colleagues. Find a path forward here. Work with us to find a way to pass laws that make this less likely. I understand my Republican colleagues will not agree to everything that I may support, but there is a common denominator that we can find.
Joining me now to discuss these issues is Texas State Representative Ron Reynolds and Jasmine Crockett. Thank you both for being with us this morning. This shooting has rocked our country. Where were you when you found out, and what was your reaction? Representative Reynolds, let's begin with you.
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be back here on the show with you. I was in my district office in Missouri City when the news broke, and my heart immediately broke as a father of two children who are in elementary school, who were literally in school at the time that I got the alert. I was devastated. I thought that could have been me or any one of my loved ones or anyone else that is in America. And unfortunately, this has happened tragically too often. Enough is enough, like the president said. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Another mass shooting. And I'm a proud Christian, but I'm sick and tired of hopes and prayers. Hopes and prayers that alone are not going to get us there to a solution. We need some action. Faith without works is dead, and we need legislative action at the congressional level and at the state level.
And in response to that, Representative Crockett, how do we finally move this forward? How many more children, how many more people have to die?
You know, I don't know what the answer is, and it's sad that you would even have to ask a question about how many more people have to die before we get legislation that will work. The reality is that as lawmakers, we are supposed to be the ones that are writing policy that will hopefully save lives. People-centered policies. Texas has failed time and time again. We have been in the news over and over and over because we continue to lead this country in the wrong direction. I applaud the president for his very strong stance. I mean, it's been enough is enough, right? You talk about the fact that Sandy Hook happened in 2012. This is 10 years later, and we're still begging for just common sense gun reform. And if states won't do it, then it is incumbent upon us to do it on the federal level. And so we need to make sure that we are not allowing just any and everyone to get a gun. This was an 18-year-old, and sadly enough, in the state of Texas, you can walk around without any license or anything in the state. And so law enforcement wouldn't have even been able to approach him because they weren't even able to say, hey, do you have a license to carry? Because they changed the law. And so we need to make sure that we're pushing back very strongly on the federal level.
And Representative Reynolds, just in response to that, talk about the pushback. How do we finally get action?
Well, it's time for the American people to stand up. The American people are the bosses, and they have the power to hire and fire. And it's time to fire those who are beholden to the National Rifle Association, the NRA, who all they seem to care about is profits for their shareholders at the expense of the American people. I'm just done with this we can't stop the bad guys from getting guns. If we can make it more difficult, if we can reduce the deaths, then that's progress. But we can't sit there and just sit on our hands and say we're waiting for the next mass shooting to happen and just say, well, we need mental health or we need that. We need to make sure that we close gun show loopholes. We need red flag laws that are enforceable so that people who shouldn't be getting guns, we need to get rid of AR assault rifles. They need to be for military. They need to be for the police, but they're not for hunting. We're not trying to subvert the Second Amendment and people's right to bear arms. All we're trying to do is have sensible, common sense gun reforms so that people who are dangerously a menace or a mental ill do not have access to guns.
The response to the shooting has been huge on social media. One person took to Twitter writing, quote, "In retrospect, Sandy Hook marked the end of the U.S. gun control debate. Once America decided that killing children was bearable, it was over. We have seen these school shootings time and time again." What's your response to this? Let's start with Representative Crockett.
Yeah, sadly enough, I agree. You know, it's amazing how we end up getting amnesia when it's time to act. We saw a similar situation in El Paso with a mass shooting that happened there. We just ended our first legislative session since El Paso. And even with the El Paso delegation, reminding my colleagues on the floor of that tragedy, instead of doing something that hopefully would prevent someone like that masked man from being able to perpetrate a similar type of crime, we went the opposite direction. And so I agree with Rep. Reynolds. It is time to start firing. You know, we become one issue voters. We can't become one issue voters. And if we are going to be one issue voters, then we need to be one issue, which means we are about the people. We are about doing what's right. If you can't stand for children, I don't think that you can stand for anything. And so I hope that we continue to apply the pressure. You know, yesterday was actually a runoff election day in the state of Texas. You asked what Rep. Reynolds was doing. I was at the polls. I was at the polls because I was trying to get through my runoff election when I ended up receiving a text alert about what happened. Enough is enough. It is time to vote out these people that just don't care about taking care of us.
And of course, your fellow senator, your fellow Texan, Senator Ted Cruz, made some pretty controversial statements following the news of the shooting. Take a listen to what he had to say.
You see politicians try to politicize it. You see Democrats and a lot of folks in the media whose immediate solution is to try to restrict the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. That doesn't work. It's not effective. It doesn't prevent crime. We know what does prevent crime, which is going after felons and fugitives and those with serious mental illness, arresting them, prosecuting them when they try to illegally buy firearms.
So we know Cruz has been very vocal on his stance on gun reform. What is your response to his statement that you just heard? Representative Reynolds, let's start with you.
Well, you know, I'm really outraged and I'm embarrassed that that is the U.S. Senator junior senator from Texas. He is more concerned about lining his pockets with campaign contributions from the NRA than protecting Texans. And it's time out for that. It is time to put people over politics and special interests. And so I think it's a bunch of crap. And I think that Ted Cruz is unfit for service. And I think he's more concerned about taking away a woman's right to choose. He's more concerned about taking away people's access to voting rights than he is about protecting the public health and safety and making sure that people who shouldn't have guns don't get a chance to get them. So I think the Texans and the people all over this country need to wake up and vote their values and put an end to this. That is the only way that we're going to get common sense gun reforms. Enough is enough.
And Representative Crockett, the National Rifle Association, speaking of gun reforms, it's scheduled to hold their convention in Houston this week. This is just 3 hours from where that tragedy occurred. Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Senator Cruz are scheduled to attend. So what message is this sending to Texans?
That they don't care. It's the same message they've been sending. You know, I need people to start voting in their own interest. And voting in your interest is voting both of them out of office. I mean, you know, to hear Ted Cruz, the same guy that ran away when we were in the middle of the winter storm, or to even hear our governor try to address this issue, the same governor that feels as if we need way more regulation on a woman's uterus than we do on guns. The last time I checked, I think the loaded firearm is a little bit more dangerous than a woman's uterus. I'm sorry. And so, you know, it's just the hypocrisy for me that all of these politicians in the state of Texas continue to propound. It's hypocritical, or it's the messaging overall. You know, they say one thing and they do another. They say we're pro-life. Well, we're pro-life unless it means that you're going to take away the guns, right? They say we're pro-life unless it means that as these children are born and we're having a shortage as it relates to them being able to eat, we won't worry about voting on a bill that'll make sure that we get baby formula. You know, I am tired of the hypocrisy of the Republicans. And honestly, I think if you care about our future, it shouldn't matter if you're a D, a R, or an I. You should be voting in your interest, and that means voting against these crazy Republicans.
Representative Crockett and Representative Reynolds, unfortunately, we are out of time, but appreciate you both so much for being with us today and sharing your insight. As we head into break, here is a live look at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, where that deadly shooting took place. More coverage on the other side of the break. Stay with us. We are continuing to follow the tragic shooting out of Uvalde, Texas. 21 people are dead, including 19 children. And we know right now in D.C. the flags are at half staff. And as you can imagine, the shooting will change the lives of people in that community. Listen to a survivor from the deadly school shooting in Parkland, Florida. He spoke about the impact that this could have on students in Texas. Take a listen.
Especially when you're young and in these schools, this happens during the formative years of your life. So these students are going to be going back into school soon, and they are going to live lives and have childhoods and early adulthoods that are completely informed by this tragedy. And from what I've seen with Parkland and with all these other horrible shootings, it changes people forever.
As parents, many of us woke up wondering, how do we talk to our children about all of this? And what is too much when it comes to exposing them to the brutal reality of mass shootings in the world that we live in today? Dr. Angela Jones is a therapist and joins us live now with more insight into how to have these most difficult conversations with our youth. Doctor, thank you so much for being here with us. First, just talk about the trauma students are likely to experience after learning that their classmates were killed in a shooting.
It's unspeakable. right? You have to realize that these children are that was their safe space. They were able to go to school, they were able to be themselves, laugh, play, and now it's a place of sadness and tragedy and fear, So for the families of the survivors, you have to sit there and validate their feelings, let them know that school is still safe, but it's okay for them to be scared. It's okay for them to express their sadness and their worry. You don't want to say, "Oh, don't worry about that," or "You shouldn't be scared." You want to validate that. But if they tell you, "I don't want to go to school anymore," you don't want to perpetuate the situation by not allowing them to go to school or not allowing them to know that school it can continue to be a safe space, because that will transcend into to their, to when they go to middle school and they go to high school, and it will have a lifelong effect on them. So validating their feelings, making sure that you're there for them, allowing them to cry, allowing them also to be angry is going to be the most important thing.
We often hear therapists and counselors say, make sure that you have an open conversation and you tell your children this is an open conversation. What exactly does that mean?
Well, especially for older kids, they're going to have a better grasp of what happened. So you have to be honest and open with them. Open meaning allowing them to ask questions that may be uncomfortable, to express, like I was saying, that anger that they may have or confusion, but you have to be prepared. And if you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, "I don't really know. Let's try to find out together." Kids need to feel like they're partners with you as well. Especially at this time, they want to feel that you are a safe space. So if you know and you know what to say, then go ahead and say. And if you don't know, just say, "We can explore this together. Let's figure this out together." They need to feel safe with you to know that they can say what they need to say to you, because the next person that they're going to talk to is their friends, the peers that are also going through this, and it's not going to be that constructive.
Yeah, we want them to hear it from us first as opposed to another party. How much exposure do we present to them? I mean, you turn on your TV, this story is flooding our airwaves. You get on social media, every post in your feed is about it. What sort of limitations do we want to put on how much exposure our kids receive to information?
If they're high school, they're going to be exposed to it 100%. It's going to be on their phones. It's going to be on the TV. So there's not really, you can try to protect them, but just know that when it comes to the teen years, especially high school, they're going to be fully aware of what's going on because they have Twitter, Instagram, all the different social media platforms. As far as like elementary school children, I would protect them from seeing the news, seeing it constantly all day, flooding their lives on a daily basis with this information can become overwhelming, and they're not going to really know what to do with that. This is an emotion they have never felt before, so they're not really going to know what to do with it. So trying to let them see it on the TV, on your phones, it's too much. You do want to protect them. Now, protecting them means allowing them to still ask you questions. You don't want to lie and say it didn't happen, or you don't want to lie and say, "Oh, it's fine, don't worry about it." You just want to make sure that you're not flooding their minds with this negative news, the negative stuff on TV, the negative stuff on the internet. Just try to protect them as much as possible.
I think you bring up a very important point, because as a parent, it's an illusion to think that we might be able to micromanage our teenagers' exposure to social media and what they see online. So you're telling us as parents to be realistic, know that they are going to see it. And that is why it's so important to create that open space where they can share their thoughts. So how do you go about creating that space?
Creating that space, you can start the conversation. Your children may not feel safe enough, or they're not sure if they can come to you with this kind of information. So just sit them down and just say, "Hey, I'm really feeling a lot of feelings about what's going on. And I want to talk with you about it to see what kind of feelings you're feeling, to see if we can help each other." You starting that conversation in this open way will allow them to see, like, "Oh, okay, this is okay. We can talk about it," because otherwise they're going to hide their feelings. They're going to, close their bedroom doors, and you don't know what they're going to do behind their bedroom doors if you allow them to close it. But starting that conversation, opening it up with other members of your family. You can have, of course, your spouse there. You can have a cousin there. You can have an aunt there. Having them know that they have a support system is going to be the most important thing. Like, hey, you're not alone in this. We are here with you. Even a neighbor can be there with you. That would be honestly a great way, because you can actually tag team and know that, hey, if she talks to you about this or if he talks to you about that, we are all in this together. So the best thing if there is a quote, is we're all in this together. Let's stay together. Let's support one another.
And at what point as a parent do you say, this is deeper than what I can handle? It's time to get a therapist involved.
I mean, honestly, I would say even while you're having these conversations, you may want to go ahead and start looking at different therapists, just so you can have somebody in mind that you would be safe or you would want your child to go to, and maybe even yourself. This is a very traumatic event for especially adults as well, parents thinking about their children going to school. So go ahead and seek out therapy now. It kind of will help you get a third perspective as to like what we should do, how I can handle it. And it's like a free space, a safe space that you know that I can express how I feel. And it's with someone that's unbiased, that is giving me feedback and helping me through this process. So even though if you're having open conversations, go ahead and still look up, find a therapist in your area, get someone on standby ready for when you're ready to go.
Dr. Angela Jones, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your insight. As we head into break, here is a live look at the White House, where the American flag is at half-staff in honor of the lives lost at Robb Elementary School. BNC Live will be right back. Welcome back to BNC Live. More reaction from federal leaders past and present, as well as condolences from around the world for the victims in yesterday's tragedy. Former President Barack Obama took to Twitter. He said, quote, "Michelle and I grieve with the families in Uvalde, Texas, who are experiencing pain that no one should have to bear." He went on to say, it's long past time for action, any kind of action. And it's another tragedy, a quieter but no less tragic one, for families to wait another day. Republican Senator Mitch McConnell also tweeting. He says, quote, "Horrified and heartbroken by reports of the disgusting violence directed at innocent school kids in Uvalde, Texas. The entire country is praying for the children, families, teachers, and the staff and the first responders on the scene." U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "There is no such thing as being pro-life while supporting laws that let children be shot in their schools, elders in grocery stores, worshipers in their houses of faith, survivors of abusers, or anyone in a crowded place. This violence must end." Ukraine's president tweeting, "Deeply saddened by the news of the murder of innocent children in Texas. Sincere condolences to the families of the victims and the people of the U.S. and the president over this tragedy. The people of Ukraine share the pain of the relatives and friends of the victims of all Americans." French President Emmanuel Macron calling this a cowardly attack. In a tweet, he says, "We share the shock and grief of the American people and the rage of those who are fighting to end the violence." Thank you for being with us for this hour of BNC Live. I'm Naja Sherman. Stay with us because we have even more news on the other side of the break.